I was paying for my daughter's entire wedding when she told me I wouldn't be sitting at the family table. She said the seating arrangement would look better without me. I remember staring at her for several seconds, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Waiting for the part where she laughed and said she was joking. It never came. That night I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by wedding contracts and bank statements, asking myself a question I should have asked years ago. If I stopped paying, would I still matter? Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Richard Coleman. I'm 68 years old, retired, and for most of my life I owned a construction company. I wasn't a wealthy man by billionaire standards, but I had done well. Better than I ever expected when I started with 1 truck and 2 employees almost 40 years earlier. My wife, Margaret, used to say I had 2 weaknesses. The first was coffee. The second was our daughter, Emily. She was right about both. Margaret passed away 7 years ago after a short battle with cancer. Even now, there are mornings when I still expect to hear her moving around the kitchen. After she died, Emily became the center of my world. Not because I wanted to replace Margaret. That wasn't possible. But helping Emily gave me something to focus on. Something to hold on to. Over the years, helping became a habit. When Emily needed help with a down payment, I helped. When her car broke down, I paid for repairs. When she wanted to go back to school, I covered part of the tuition. Every decision felt reasonable at the time. That's how entitlement usually starts. Not with one giant favor, with hundreds of small ones. When Emily got engaged to Ryan, I was genuinely happy for her. Ryan seemed responsible, hardworking, polite. The kind of young man a father hopes his daughter finds. At least that's what I thought in the beginning. The wedding planning started almost immediately. At first, Emily insisted she didn't expect me to contribute much. That lasted approximately 2 weeks. The venue deposit became my responsibility. Then the catering, then photography, then flowers, then the honeymoon deposit, then the wedding planner. Each request arrived wrapped in appreciation. Dad, are you sure? Dad, you don't have to. Dad, that's so generous. And every time, I said yes. Not because I felt pressured, because I wanted her to have the wedding she'd always imagined. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. At the time, I couldn't. Or maybe I didn't want to. The first sign came during a venue tour. I arrived 15 minutes early and waited near the entrance. When Emily and Ryan showed up, they walked directly past me while discussing table arrangements. Neither noticed I was standing there. Eventually, Emily turned around and looked surprised. "Oh, Dad, you're here." It wasn't rude. Not exactly. But it felt strange, like I had become an afterthought. The second sign came a month later. I learned from one of Emily's friends that the wedding colors had changed. Nobody had mentioned it to me. That shouldn't have mattered, except I was paying for most of the decorations. The third sign came when invoices started arriving before conversations. Sometimes I discovered new wedding expenses because vendors emailed me directly. I would call Emily and ask about them. She would always have an explanation, and somehow I always accepted it. Because fathers are very good at convincing themselves that temporary disappointments don't mean anything. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was sitting with Emily at a wedding planner's office. The meeting had lasted nearly 2 hours. Everyone was discussing reception details, music, not flowers, seating charts, guest lists. I mostly listened. The planner eventually asked where I should be seated during dinner. Emily glanced at a chart and pointed toward a table near the back. I assumed she was mistaken. "That can't be right," I said. The planner looked confused. Emily sighed, the way people sigh when they think something obvious is being explained for the second time. "No, Dad, that's your table." I looked again. Friends, distant relatives, several people I barely knew, but not family, not Emily, not Ryan, not the wedding party, not anyone remotely important. I laughed because I honestly thought there had to be an error. "Where's the family table?" Emily barely looked up. "We decided to keep that table smaller." I stared at her. "And I'm not sitting there?" She shook her head. "The seating arrangement just looks cleaner this way." Cleaner. Such a harmless word. such a painful one. The planner suddenly became very interested in her laptop. Ryan stared at his phone. Neither said anything. I waited for someone to speak. Nobody did. Finally, I asked the question. So I'm paying for the wedding, but I'm not sitting with my own family. Emily immediately became irritated. Dad, why are you making this a thing? Making this a thing. I still remember those exact words. Not because they were cruel, because of how casually they were delivered. As if my feelings were an inconvenience. As if my role in the wedding was writing checks and staying out of the way. The meeting ended shortly afterward. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Cleaner. Making this a thing. Back at home, I sat in my office and opened a drawer filled with wedding paperwork. At first, I only intended to review a few invoices. Then I started adding numbers: venue, catering, photography, flowers, planner, transportation, honeymoon deposit, one expense after another. The total kept growing, and for the first time, I felt something uncomfortable settling in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to realization. By midnight, I was still sitting at that desk. The calculator sat beside me. The final number glowed on the screen. $123,487. I stared at it for a very long time. Over $123,000. And somehow I wasn't important enough to sit at the family table. That was the moment I began asking questions I had avoided for years. Questions that had nothing to do with weddings, and everything to do with my relationship with my daughter. The next morning I woke up hoping I had overreacted. Sometimes a good night's sleep changes your perspective. This time it didn't. The number was still sitting on my desk. $123,487. I made coffee and sat back down in my office. For years, I had handled problems the same way I handled business challenges. I looked at facts, so I started looking. Not just at wedding expenses, at everything. I opened old emails, text messages, and bank records. At first, I was simply trying to understand how the wedding had reached that number. Instead, I started noticing something else. A pattern. Most of Emily's calls followed the same formula. She would ask how I was doing. We'd talk for 2 or 3 minutes. Then a problem appeared. A payment, an expense, a repair, a bill, something she needed help with. Once the problem was solved, the conversation ended. I went back nearly 3 years. The pattern never changed. What bothered me wasn't the money. It was realizing how little else existed. I couldn't remember the last time Emily called just to spend time with me. The realization sat heavily on my shoulders. A week later, I attended another wedding planning meeting. Again, most decisions had already been made. Again, nobody had informed me beforehand. At one point, the planner mentioned upgraded floral arrangements. Several $1,000s had been added to the budget. I looked at Emily. When was this approved? She seemed surprised by the question. Last week. Nobody told me. Ryan laughed softly. It's just flowers. Just flowers. Another harmless phrase. Another reminder that everyone was spending my money except me. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and made a note. That evening, an old friend named Susan called me. Susan had known Emily since she was a child. During our conversation, she hesitated before speaking. Richard, I probably shouldn't say this. Whenever someone says that, they're usually about to tell you something important. What is it? I asked. There was a pause. Then she said it. I heard Emily talking with some relatives after the engagement party. I felt my stomach tighten. What did she say? Susan sounded uncomfortable. She said not to worry about the extra costs because you always pay. The word stung, but what came next hurt more. Susan continued. She laughed and said, Dad always pays. He won't make a big deal about it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat alone in my living room. Dad always pays. Not Dad always helps. Not Dad is generous. Not Dad sacrifices. Just Dad pays. The statement explained more than she probably realized. It explained why nobody consulted me, why nobody appreciated the cost, why my feelings seemed irrelevant. To them, my support wasn't generosity anymore. It was expectation. Over the following days, I began asking simple questions about wedding expenses. Nothing confrontational, just questions. The reaction shocked me. Emily became defensive almost immediately. "Dad, why are you suddenly acting like this?" "Acting like what?" "Like everything has to be approved by you." I nearly laughed. Approved by me. I was paying for it. But somehow asking questions had become unreasonable. Ryan was worse. One evening he called me directly. "I think you're making Emily stressed." I stayed calm. "By asking where the money is going?" "No," he replied. "By trying to control everything." That word again. Control. People love using it when someone stops giving them whatever they want. Within days, relatives started calling. An aunt told me to focus on Emily's happiness. A cousin suggested. I was taking things personally. Nobody asked why I felt hurt. Nobody mentioned the family table. Nobody mentioned respect. Every conversation revolved around one thing: the wedding, the budget, the money. The more they talked, the clearer everything became. I wasn't being treated like a father. I was being treated like a resource. The real turning point came one night while reviewing contracts. I noticed something strange. Every major decision had been made without me. The upgraded venue package, the premium decorations, the additional entertainment, the luxury honeymoon upgrades. I wasn't included in any of those discussions, yet every invoice somehow ended up with my name attached. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For years, I believed my support made me important. Now I saw the truth. Support was the reason they didn't think about me at all. I wasn't included because they respected me. I was included because they needed me. And the moment that realization settled in, something changed inside me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. For the first time, I stopped asking how to make everyone happy and started asking a different question. What would happen if I simply stopped paying? That question would change everything. A week after my realization, the final piece fell into place. It happened by accident. One afternoon, I received an email that wasn't meant for me. Emily had forwarded a vendor message to several people, and attached beneath it was part of a conversation with one of her friends. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did, and one sentence changed everything. Honestly, Dad's contribution is helpful, but having him involved just complicates things. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, not because I didn't understand it, because I finally did. The family table, the ignored phone calls, the decisions made without me, the assumptions about my money. Suddenly, everything made sense. Emily wasn't trying to hurt me. That was the hardest part. She simply didn't think about me anymore. I had become a funding source, nothing more. That evening, I made several phone calls. The luxury honeymoon upgrades were canceled. The premium wedding planner package was removed. Additional venue enhancements were canceled. Honored every commitment I had already signed. But I agreed to nothing new. No arguments, no speeches, just boundaries. The reaction came fast. Emily called first, then again, then 6 more times. When I finally answered, she sounded furious. "Dad, vendors are saying payments were canceled." "Some were. Why would you do that?" I stayed calm. If my involvement complicates things, my money shouldn't be necessary either. Silence, then anger, then tears. For the first time, none of it changed my decision. The following weeks were chaotic. Emily and Ryan suddenly had to make choices. Real choices. Budgets mattered now. Costs mattered now. The wedding didn't stop, but the luxury extras disappeared, and something interesting happened. The world didn't end. They adapted. Ryan picked up extra work. Emily reduced expenses. Problems were solved without me writing a check. For the first time in a long time, they were standing on their own. Then the wedding day arrived. I wasn't sure what to expect. I arrived early and quietly, took my seat before the ceremony. The wedding itself was beautiful. Not because it was expensive, because it was genuine. Before the reception began, Emily found me standing alone near the entrance. Her eyes were red. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me. I owe you an apology. I remained silent. She looked down. I spent so much time expecting your support that I forgot to appreciate your presence. Those words hit harder than any argument could have. A few minutes later, Ryan approached. I treated you like a funding source, he admitted. I'm sorry, no excuses, no blame, just accountability. Then Emily surprised me. She took my arm and led me into the reception hall, straight to the family table. Not because I paid for it, not because anyone pressured her, because she finally understood where I belonged. As I sat beside my daughter, I realized something. The lesson had never been about money. It had been about respect. The canceled upgrades never returned. The consequences remained, but so did something better. Boundaries, respect, and a healthier relationship than we'd had in years. That night, I stopped trying to buy closeness, and my daughter finally learned that support is a gift, not an obligation. The wedding wasn't saved by money. The relationship was saved when the money stopped. After the wedding, I expected things to slowly return to the way they had been before. They didn't. For the first few weeks, Emily called more often than usual, not to ask for money, not to discuss bills, not because something needed fixing. Sometimes she simply called to ask how I was doing. The first time it happened, I honestly didn't know what to think. We spent 20 minutes talking about gardening. Nothing else, no requests, no hidden agenda, just conversation. When I hung up, I realized how long it had been since we'd spoken that way. A month later, Ryan invited me to lunch, just the two of us. He admitted that losing the extra wedding funding had forced him to rethink a lot of things. I always assumed you'd be there to solve problems, he said. I nodded. No. I never realized how unfair that was. For the first time since meeting him, I felt like I was talking to a man instead of someone waiting for assistance. The biggest change came 6 months later. Emily and Ryan bought a modest home, not because I paid for it, because they saved for it, worked for, and earned it. When Emily handed me the keys during the housewarming tour, she smiled. We wanted you to see this first. I looked around the living room. Nothing about the house was extravagant, but it represented something far more valuable than luxury, responsibility, growth, self-respect. As we stood there, Emily quietly squeezed my hand. I'm grateful, you said. No, I looked at her. Most parents spend years trying to protect their children from discomfort. Sometimes the harder job is allowing them to experience it, because growth rarely comes from being rescued. It comes from learning to stand on your own. That day, I realized I hadn't lost my daughter during the wedding. I had finally gotten her back. The lesson was never about punishment. It was about restoring respect, and respect, unlike money, is something that lasts.